And I'd like to welcome everyone to the 13th Annual Growing Online Learning Conference presented by Illinois Community Colleges Online. The theme for the 2021 conference is Teaching, Learning, and Caring. We hope that this year's conference is beneficial as we continue with teaching and learning in challenging times. I'm Becky Benkert, Instructional Designer for Learning Technologies at College of DuPage, and I'll be moderating this session. And ILCO would like to thank Heartland Community College for providing the web conferencing platform for use in this year's conference. Please note that captioning is available for the conference sessions. And our schedule, briefly for the 3 days, I will show momentarily here. There we go. And it can be found at the conference website on ilco.net under resources and events. And I will also show the conference recordings will be available after the conference. If you have any questions about attending the live session, information is found on the conference website and in your conference registration email. And you can also contact Jeff Newell at jeff.newell@illinois.gov. And ILCO this afternoon, is pleased to welcome Mary Carlson, Associate Professor of Business, Marketing, and Management at College of DuPage. Mary has been teaching in higher education since 2005 after working in both public and private sector marketing for 15 years. A first-generation college student and a graduate of a community college, Mary went on to pursue her bachelor's and 2 master's degrees. Mary said that she misses teaching students in the classroom, but enjoys using the latest learning technology to build the same connections in the online classroom environment today. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. So I'll go ahead and share my screen at this point. Oops, wrong button. So I appreciate you all coming out today. And you can see here's my presentation. I will be going back and forth a little bit because there's some kind of glitch when it comes to our friends with Microsoft. They keep pushing me back to Safari when I want to stay in Chrome. So I appreciate you all coming out today and listening to my presentation. What I'd like to do is just kind of start in this mode. In 2013, when I was able to get a full-time position here at the College of DuPage. I had this experience because I went from teaching 1 or 2 classes here and there to teaching 6 or 7, and I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm doing a ton of work prepping for these classes, and I just felt like my students, I was the one working harder than my students, and I was like, this has got to change. Something's going to happen here. So what I found was is this concept called active learning. I'm going to show you this video in just a second, but I'm just going to kind of break it down into 3 things I'm going to go over. So first, I just want to show you a little bit about what active learning is and how I leveraged service learning that we have here at the College of DuPage. And then what projects did I use to pivot, like how I pivoted the projects to a digital environment, because obviously we are no longer in the classroom. And so that's kind of like how I break this presentation down. So I'm going to show you this video really quick, and then we'll get.
When I think of active learning, I think of students co-constructing knowledge with me in some way. That could be a project, it could be around a discussion, it could be a fishbowl.
When I see a classroom where students are talking more to each other than listening to the professor, that to me is active learning.
Active learning involves creating and constructing artifacts, such as a drawing or a painting or a sculpture. If you're in the performing arts, active learning is a performance.
I get to be creative here, and I get to develop new things and new activities, and even things with real life like paper and scissors, and having students construct and build and perform.
Active learning is as much figuring out what the questions are as it is figuring out what the answers to those questions are. In fact, the questions are far more important than the answers.
Choosing meaningful activities or questions is at the heart of what makes active learning effective. We need to ask them questions that offer opportunities for meaningful thinking.
Active learning is the only thing I do these days. I don't lecture if I can help it.
When I think back to my college experience, the only courses I remember are the very few that I had that incorporated active learning. Looking back 10 or 15 years later, I'm thinking, I wish I'd had more of that.
So this kind of gives you an idea what active learning is all about. And you can see how it just mesmerized me. It got me thinking, wow, now I can make these students do more work than me. And that's what it should be about. So one of the things is that I took the transcript of what all these professors said at the University of Minnesota and I put it into this cloud. And you can see like what really stood out, what were the keywords that stood out. And you can see that it comes down to students, questions, and learning. And that's what it's all, it starts with the students, getting them to ask questions, building that active and learning. And that's where I was like, okay, you sold me on this. And I also wanted to create where a student's going to look back and say, well, does she or he remember that presentation that I gave on October 18th at 2:00? No, they're going to look back and think about those projects, the active learning things that I had them do, whether they're talking amongst their cohorts or working with me, and they're going to say, wow, I remember this project I had to do. And that's what she said, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I'm looking for. So I was sold on active learning, and then I thought, okay, where do I find these projects? And I got in touch with our folks at Service Learning here at the College of DuPage, and I looked at the classes that I teach, which I teach a bunch of different marketing type courses, and then I even throw in a little personal finance class there. And our Service Learning is a group here on campus that connects us with companies and groups within the community that are looking for student projects to be done. And a lot of them are nonprofit, which is great. Some of the projects that I've done are local, meaning they're on campus. So like US Bank, Sodexo, the College Athletics, they all had questions. They all had projects that they would love to have student feedback or student interaction of their experience. And so I could use all these organizations and the needs that they have and build that into my classes. Now, I know a lot of you are probably thinking, well, I don't have a Service Learning, but what you can do is contact your career services, because a lot of times these organizations will reach out to your career services and say, hey, we don't necessarily need an intern, or we don't need to hire, but we have this project that we would love for students to do for us. If they could be part of their learning, the learning that they have in the classroom. So just something to think about. Sorry, my slides tend to go a little crazy. So now we go to 2020, March of 2020, and we're all now online. Which is interesting is that there's this conception that all our students are working in their basements in their parents' home. And I looked and looked for a picture of students in their basement, but I could not find one. So I had to now pivot to this online environment where we used to have these discussions in class and work on group projects, and now we're in this digital environment of teaching. And so how do I go about building these same projects and still having that communication dialogue amongst the students as well as the teacher? And so what I'm going to show you is a couple of different projects that I did and the type of platforms or the learning technology that I used to support that Service Learning project. So the first one is Mercy Housing, Marion Park Apartments. This is low-income housing here in DuPage County, and they reached out to us to create a financial literacy flyer. This flyer was, geared for young adults that lived in the complex, and it was for my personal finance class. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Common Ground Scholar. It's actually built by a Professor Cope at the University of Illinois. And so what I did is I used this as a content collaboration tool, and it's free. So that was key. Like, I wanted to try to keep these tools that we're using free as much as possible, because the students don't need any additional expense. And so this has been a great tool for collaboration. Now, I use this for my service learning in that I would assign students in groups and say, okay, you have this topic, you have this topic, and you have this topic, and you need to collaborate the content. You need to be the expert in that specific topic. So, for instance, buying a computer, or how to save $100 in 100 days, something of a topic, and they had to go out there and research that topic and find content to build into this platform. So what I did was I just took a screenshot because I wanted to protect student names. And this is actually my content that I posted here. They're examples so that students can get an idea of what I was looking for. Now, this is geared for another class, but it's the same concept. And what's nice about this is that it's set up as like a social format. Now, it's not set up to, like posts and get followers. It's just more of a academic information and to share. And what's great about it is that here's this post that you can post information such as videos, articles, you can post pictures. I would write up I would have them write up a kind of a short summary of what that article is about and how it relates to the topic that they need to curate. And then I would encourage the students to write comments like, what did you get the most out of that article that student brought? Or how could you use this in the financial flyer that you're going to be creating? And so this gives the students the ability to have that connection amongst each other, as well as to save time so that they're not looking for 5 different topics. They only have to look for one, and then the others have already been kind of looked at, and the students found that was the best one that was out there. So this is a great tool. It's free. You can't get any better than that. So and I use this a lot, especially with discussion boards for other purposes, but for service learning, this has been a great tool. The second project that I do a lot every semester, I'll pick an organization, usually on campus for this one. So for instance, Sodexo, which is our food vendor. Now, obviously, this was on campus, so we wouldn't necessarily do that this semester, but I'll use this as an example. In my Principles of Marketing class, we will have a market research survey that they would do. And we would pick an organization. They would come out and they would talk to us and say, hey, we want to survey the students. So the surveys go out to the students. And the students in my class are creating these surveys. Now, we're still old school in that we create a paper copy and we have them, circle it. We don't necessarily have the bubbles and things like that. So we try to limit it to between 5 and 7 questions just to get to the point of the information that we're trying to get at. And because also it helps us to take the data in and a lot easier than having like 20 questions and you have to do it by hand. But with this assignment, I use Piazza, which has been a great tool. Although this tool is, this semester they just recently went to a paid format, but it is still free if you're under 25 students. And in my case, I do create the groups in groups of like 4 or 5 students, so it falls under that. And so what I'll show you here really quickly is, hopefully this will click through really easily. I created kind of a dummy class, and I would throw up questions like, here's a question, and I would ask the students, hey, what do you think of this question? Should I change it? Is it worded right? Are we asking it in the right way? And that's part of the learning process. And what's cool is that for here, I wrote something, hey, we need to develop a question about a different type of food students would consider purchasing on campus. And so the students can answer the question, and even the other students can do a follow-up question and saying, I don't like sushi. something, or so, and they can go ahead and respond back to the other student's question or their comments. And obviously we would try to keep it constructive in that. And I always try to emphasize that. And that way we can have that collaborate session, and so that they can come up with their 3 questions. So I'd kind of break it down so that they're not doing all of them at once. They're kind of grouped into I would have each of them do 3 questions, and then they would have to try to develop the best way of asking the questions and making sure that we have all the right information. So that Piazza has been great. And in fact, what's interesting, my daughter is at IMSA this semester, and her professor is using it. And I was like, wow. So it's catching on, that's for sure. The next example that I have for a service learning project is in my social media and digital marketing classes. These are primarily, I use this for my nonprofits, and they were looking for social media content, and it's specifically that they were trying to target the Gen Zs and the alpha generation, and these are students that can identify with that more so than the folks that were actually putting it all together, being they're probably in the Gen X or the boomers. And so they really reached out to, I've gotten a lot of requests for this. And this would be creating social media content. But for this, I actually put them into groups. And what I try to do here is kind of assign them a different group. And this tool, I'm actually using this semester for the first time. I actually used it in a class that I took last semester, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a game changer. Not only is it free, at least at College of DuPage, it's a single sign-on, meaning they can sign on with their COD password as if they were signing on Blackboard. And to kind of show you a little bit, you can create teams. This is just a screenshot. And what I'm going to do is kind of pause this really quick. And I'm going to show you, let's see. Okay, this is kind of a fake class that I set up, and you can see here that I have them grouped into different groups. Now the only challenge with this is that I'm part of that group, but at least it gets them started, and if they want to go off and start their own team, they can, because they can pull up each of their students within the school, and they can invite them to, like a student A can go ahead and invite their assigned students that they're within that group. But what's great about this is that they have what's called, if we look at this group here, A, they can do file sharing. They can also do a chat. And so especially with students that might be working all day long and there's this conversation going on, and instead of going through 14 emails that have been going back and forth, it's all housed here. And then the other thing that's been great about it is that students can also get the app for it, and then they can have that communication, and it's separated as opposed to all these emails that come through their school email. And as far as teams go, they could also meet at any time. They don't have to necessarily set up a Zoom meeting. They can go in here and schedule a meet, or they can just say, hey, let's meet at 11 o'clock and just log into Microsoft Teams, our team, and we'll get together there. And they can, like I said, they can share files, come up with strategies, especially when it comes to content, because, you know, like they can focus on calendar days, like, hey, we have, we just had Valentine's. What kind of ideas could we have for that? Or we're coming up to Pi Day. What could we add to that from a social media content strategy? And so this has been a great tool to connect with students from a group standpoint, especially online. I can't say this enough. And what's interesting is that, like I said, everything is housed there. It's kind of like a Google Doc where they can go in and make changes. I actually have a student who decided to go and see his dad since we're online. He's like, why stay here? I'm just going to go stay with my dad. Well, his dad is in Dubai. So, I remember talking to him, and he's like, yeah, I just have the time zone thing. But this tool kind of makes it a little bit easier so that you're kind of still connected, even though you might be 12 or 13 hours apart. And they can kind of keep track of what's going on. And so that's been really, really great for that student. Some other tools just to kind of talk about that are free from a content creation where the students can work on projects is Canva, especially in the world of marketing. This tool can be used to create social media posts. It can also create brochures, professional presentation software that's so much better than PowerPoint. I actually create my syllabus on this. It makes it much more engaging for the students because they have a lot of really great artwork, and it really kind of pops for from a communication standpoint. And there's a free version of it, and to me, I think it suffices what I need. Obviously, if I was to be part of an organization, I might want to bump up to the paid version, but for students, and this is great to put on their resume, especially in marketing. I also like to get students to create presentation, and especially in an online environment, it's a little bit more difficult than, oh, let's just get them up in front of the classroom. And you have platforms such as Screencast-O-Matic that are free. They usually give you about 15 minutes of length, which is usually just about what you need. I don't like to do anything very long with students. And then you can also trim, you can record clips, so like each student can kind of record theirs, and then you can kind of fuse them together. I like to really challenge them and say, listen, I don't want to see a talking head or a talking screen. I want to see a face, but then I also want to see B-roll, and to kind of build that into their experience with the class from an active learning, as well as it's more engaging for our contact at the service learning project. In conclusion, I just want to kind of stress as far as the benefits of active learning, in that we don't necessarily have to stop what we're doing because we're in this digital learning environment, that we can create those regular and substantive interaction, whether it's amongst the students or between the professor and the students. I think if anything, it puts the onus on the students to work together, and there are tools that are out there that are very inexpensive. When it comes to free, it's very inexpensive. I think also, when we talk about service learning projects, it is part of active learning, and it supports the local community, and that's what, we're part of the community, being a community college, and I think it really puts a lot of it positions the college that we're doing some really good things within the community, as well as it increases student engagement, improves critical thinking. I think, if anything, it creates that student retention, especially in an online environment, because especially when I do the collaboration tools where students can kind of work together, a lot of times, you'll have a student that really provides a great example, and I try to get in there every day and make comments with the students and kind of say, hey, this is a really good example, so that when other students come in, they can say, hey, okay, I understand now what she's looking for, or I now understand what I need to do to get this assignment done in a different example of what she's looking for. And I know that a lot of times my students feel like they're in this cave when they're in a digital environment, but now that they can kind of see what other students are doing. Now, if the student isn't really on target of what they're looking for, I don't necessarily call them out in front of everybody. I will send them a private email and just kind of say, hey, I think we need to talk, let's connect, and then I can show you what I'm looking for, or hey, did you check out so-and-so? That's the direction that I'm trying to look at. And so I do try to work with students as much as possible. And then obviously it triggers that creative thinking. The content that comes through, I feel like, especially as we all know, when you're working in a group, the creative just comes out so much better, and that they come up with some great ideas. And I just get so excited. I'm like, wow, I didn't even think about that example. And so that's been very powerful, for me as an instructor, because then I feel like I'm really connecting with the students. So that's my presentation. I didn't know if I had any questions that I can answer. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. So I appreciate everyone listening. Thank you. Yes, Canva can be fun. I have so much fun with that. It's like my syllabus is no longer the plain Microsoft Word document anymore. You know, Laura, as far as your comment about trying to keep them on the LMS as much as possible, you know, I feel like it's a starting point, but there's so many other tools that are out there that they just, and I've never had a problem where students feel like, well, where do I have to go? Especially now with the technology, we can show videos, like we have Yuja. That's been a game changer because it makes it a little bit easier for the students to venture off into new technology, and they seem to be very adaptable. Now, could I say that 20 years ago for that kind of student? Probably not, but today I don't think the students have a problem venturing into other platforms that are out there. So I appreciate all the positive comments. And if anyone has any, if you ever want me to show you how I use it in other ways as far as outside the service learning group projects, I'd be more than happy to connect with you offline someday. I just really enjoy finding new technology that's out there that students really enjoy, and being able to connect with other students, because that's what I really miss. Is it's not necessarily talking to them necessarily, it's when they connect together as a group, and when they can come back, you know, I'll have those situations where I'm like, wow, have you guys been taking classes together long? They're like, no, we just met in this class. And I'm like, wow, you guys act like you're best friends. I mean, like, you know, like they've known each other for a while. And so those are always fun. Then you know that you built that connections with each other, not only from my point of view, but from the students. So I don't know how I manage my, you know, sometimes you just have to, I just go out there and just try it and see what happens. I take baby steps. It doesn't always work. Sometimes I have to pull back. I'm using this new platform called Perusall, and that's a lot of time and effort. So I didn't put that in there this time because it is a lot of work. But we'll see, you know, maybe I'll be back sooner than later discussing that. But that's another tool that's out there. But that is a lot of work there's a huge learning curve there.
We had a question too about ideas for service project for social sciences. I don't know if anybody else has ideas too that might be helpful.
I think the biggest thing is to go out and ask the organizations that in which the students get hired to, and say, hey, what can we do? What kind of projects can we do? What can my students do to help you out, or to instill that learning and to help their organization out? Reaching out to alumni that work in that field is always helpful. They don't necessarily always connect with our career services, or you might not have a service learning group that handles that. I think we just got so many. I mean, we live 25 miles outside of Chicago, so we do have a lot more organizations here that are looking for extra resources. But I think just reaching out to groups, and you don't necessarily have to be in the community, it can be outside the community.
If we don't have any other additional questions, we'd like to thank Mary today for her presentation. Thank you very much, and you're welcome to provide your thanks in the chat here. And I'd like to remind everybody that our next session is tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. and it's titled Introduction to Universal Design for Learning, UDL, presented by Sarah Goldhammer at SIU Edwardsville and Amy Julian at Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. And reminder that links to attend the sessions are available on the conference website and also on the registration confirmation email. And if you have any questions about accessing the sessions, you can reach out to Jeff Newell at jeff.newell@illinois.gov. And we'd like to remind you that recordings of the presentations and handouts will be available at the conference website on ilco.net following the conference. Thank you, everybody, and we look forward to having everybody join tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Take care.